Look at your portfolio right now and everything seems completely fine on the surface. The stock market is touching record highs, headline economic figures look resilient, and your bank app displays a comforting, stable balance. But beneath that polished illusion, something unprecedented is happening. Gold has quietly shattered all-time highs above $2,700 an ounce. Now ask yourself a simple question. Why are the world's most powerful central banks aggressively hoarding an asset that yields zero interest at the fastest pace since 1967? Because sovereign nations are preparing for a structural financial shift that mainstream media refuses to report. If your net worth rests in commercial bank deposits, your real purchasing power is being secretly confiscated while you sleep. According to official IMF COFR data, the US dollar share of global foreign exchange reserves has plummeted from 72% in 2000 to under 58% today. This is not a routine market fluctuation, and gold is not simply getting more expensive. What you are witnessing is systematic devaluation of paper currency itself. To understand why the world's most powerful central banks are quietly ditching paper promises for physical metal, we have to look at what's happening behind closed doors. Before we go any further, let me be entirely direct. I am not a financial advisor, and this video is strictly educational macroeconomic analysis. Like you, I'm just a saver navigating a volatile economy to preserve purchasing power. Everything shared here comes directly from verified institutional sources, the Federal Reserve, IMF, World Gold Council, and Bloomberg. My goal is to provide an unbiased breakdown showing both structural threats and real strengths of paper currency. Now, before you go out and convert your entire retirement fund into gold coins, let's connect this macro story directly to your own bank account. When central banks in China, Poland, and India quietly swap dollar reserves for gold, it feels like an abstract game played abroad. But the consequences hit directly at your local supermarket checkout line. Here is why. As foreign nations reduce reliance on US debt, billions of offshore dollars slowly return to domestic shores. That extra liquidity chases the exact same goods, compounding brutal price increases on energy bills, groceries, and housing. You might receive a 4% raise at work, but sticky compounding living costs consume it before it ever hits your checking account. This reveals a stark contrast. While sovereign governments aggressively convert paper claims into unprintable physical gold, everyday retail investors remain passively locked in low-yield commercial bank deposits watching their wealth erode. Smart money is quietly de-risking right now while most people remain completely unaware of the long-term structural consequences facing their own personal cash reserves and future purchasing power. To see how this isn't just an abstract economic chart, let's look at what happens to a real family when paper currency loses its anchor. Consider David. He is a 40-year-old middle manager living in the suburbs, raising 2 kids, and doing everything the traditional financial rulebook told him to do. He worked late hours, avoided consumer debt, built up a respectable savings cushion, and invested conservatively. By early 2020, David had accumulated $50,000 in cash reserves sitting safely inside his local commercial bank account. He felt secure, prudent, and responsible. Then reality quietly set in on his household. Over the next 4 years, David did not change his spending habits, alter his lifestyle, or buy luxury items. Yet when he sat down to audit his household budget, he discovered something deeply alarming. His $50,000 had not lost nominal value, but its real-world purchasing power against basic human necessities had plummeted by more than 20%. While official headlines and Bureau of Labor Statistics (CPI) reports insistently claimed that inflation was slowing down and returning under control, David's real receipts painted a radically different picture. Auto insurance premiums soared over 20% year-over-year. Monthly home utility bills expanded relentlessly. Groceries, healthcare, child care, and property taxes consumed an ever larger portion of his hard-earned monthly paycheck. David's lived experience was not a subjective illusion, it was an objective statistical reality disguised by official government hedonic adjustments. The basket of goods required to sustain a middle-class lifestyle was compounding away from him. When David looked into what institutional investors and elite family offices were doing with their capital, he realized he was playing a rigged game. While everyday families were instructed to keep emergency funds in low-yield paper currency, institutional players had spent years quietly shifting hundreds of billions out of cash into scarce, unprintable real assets designed to withstand currency debasement. David was following the rules, but the rules were designed to let paper promises melt away. David's frustration is not an accident. It is the mechanical result of a monetary system operating under extreme fiscal strain. Here is how that machine actually works. To understand how paper money loses value, imagine a pitcher of fresh lemonade. The pitcher represents all goods and services in the economy, while the lemonade mix represents total real purchasing power. If you dump 3 extra gallons of plain water into that pitcher, you end up with more liquid volume, but every single glass tastes noticeably weaker. That is currency creation in plain English. Digital paper currency can be created infinitely at zero marginal cost with a keystroke, whereas physical gold has a strictly finite global supply requiring hard human labor, physical machinery, and real energy to extract. Now, look at the actual engine driving this monetary expansion. Official U.S. Treasury data shows the national debt has blown past $35 trillion. To put that in perspective, simply paying net interest on the debt now costs over $1 trillion every single year, surpassing the entire annual national defense budget. Where does that interest money come from? It cannot come from tax revenue alone without crushing the domestic economy. So, the monetary system relies on relentless deficit spending and expansion, diluting the purchasing power of every dollar you earn. This fiscal pressure escalated dramatically following a major geopolitical trigger. In 2022, Western nations suddenly froze $300 billion of Russian sovereign foreign exchange reserves. That decision sent a shockwave through international central banks, proving that holding digital dollar reserves carries immense counterparty risk. If you cross political lines, your paper promises can be frozen instantly. Sovereign central banks realized they needed an asset with absolute zero counterparty risk, an asset that cannot be printed by decree, altered by algorithms, or frozen by foreign governments. That asset is physical gold. The historical data proves this strategic pivot. Official reports from the World Gold Council verify that global central bank net gold purchases topped 1,000 metric tons in consecutive years during 2022 and 2023. When dollars are printed simply to service interest on past debt, you enter a self-reinforcing financial spiral, what economists call the doom loop. Mainstream financial media continuously insists that sovereign national deficits do not matter for a global reserve currency issuer. But 500 years of monetary history reveal a far more dangerous reality. When debt reaches critical mass, the underlying financial engine breaks down through a precise 4-step chain reaction that squeezes middle-class savers. The first step begins with uncapped federal fiscal deficits. Even during periods of nominal economic expansion, the United States budget deficit is topping $1.8 trillion annually. The government is spending far more than it collects in tax revenues, issuing an endless flood of fresh government bonds into global financial markets to cover the shortfall. That brings us to step 2, severe global bond market indigestion. Historically, major foreign sovereigns like Japan and China stepped in to purchase massive volumes of U.S. treasuries. Today, those international buyers are actively slowing their purchases or walking away entirely, unwilling to absorb endless paper debt supply while ongoing inflation erodes real net yields. Without foreign central banks absorbing the supply, bond yields spike upward, sending government borrowing and interest costs through the roof. This forces step 3 into motion. The Federal Reserve is ultimately compelled to intervene as the buyer of last resort. Through debt monetization and emergency liquidity injections, the central bank creates new digital currency units to buy its own government's debt securities. Finally, step 4 completes the loop. As trillions of freshly created fiat units enter circulation, domestic consumer inflation resurges, and real inflation-adjusted interest rates crash deep back into negative territory. We have seen this exact pattern play out before. Look back at the severe stagflation crisis of the 1970s, which ultimately forced President Nixon to suspend dollar convertibility into gold in August 1971. Every time debt monetization replaces genuine savings, currency stability disintegrates. In fact, empirical research across 5 centuries of economic history reveals an undeniable pattern. Whenever a dominant empire's national debt to gross domestic product ratio surpasses 120%, politicians never choose painful fiscal austerity. Without exception, every single historical regime chooses currency debasement, quietly sacrificing the purchasing power of everyday citizens to inflate away sovereign liabilities. When you closely observe current U.S. debt statistics today, you are definitely not watching a temporary political dispute in Washington. You are watching a predictable, centuries-old monetary script unfold step by step in real time before our very eyes. This looks like an inescapable trap. But before you conclude that a total collapse is imminent tomorrow morning, let's look at what institutional insiders know that mainstream headlines completely ignore. To understand where the global monetary system is actually heading, you have to tune out sensationalized internet headlines and look directly at what top institutional strategists are doing behind closed doors. Ray Dalio, billionaire founder of Bridgewater Associates, has repeatedly warned that we are navigating the late stages of a classic long-term debt cycle. In this structural environment, hard physical assets like gold act as a neutral sovereign wealth anchor while paper liabilities are systematically printed into debasement. However, institutional insiders also recognize a critical counter-argument that internet doom-mongers completely ignore: the US dollar will not collapse overnight. The structural footprint of the greenback remains undeniably massive. Official data from the Bank for International Settlements proves the dollar is still involved in roughly 88% of all global foreign exchange transactions worldwide. Furthermore, Swift messaging data confirms that over 80% of global trade invoicing remains locked in dollars. Mainstream currency competitors face immense internal challenges. The Eurozone is perpetually fractured by conflicting national fiscal policies, and China's yuan suffers from strict capital controls that limit global institutional confidence. It is always deeply ironic to watch mainstream financial television pundits yell on screen that cash is king, right before commercial breaks sponsored by giant Wall Street institutions that are quietly shifting billions of dollars out of cash and directly into scarce tangible real assets. Here is the crucial insider insight elite money managers understand that average retail investors completely miss: the dollar does not need to collapse overnight to ruin your financial retirement plan. It doesn't require sudden hyperinflation or total systemic destruction. A controlled multi-year bleed, where paper currency steadily loses 5 to 7% of its real purchasing power every single year, accomplishes the exact same destructive outcome over a 10-year horizon. We are not witnessing an apocalyptic collapse. We are witnessing a sober, multi-decade transition toward a multipolar monetary framework. Sophisticated investors are not panicking. They are simply positioning their capital ahead of the crowd to avoid absorbing the silent tax of compounding fiat debasement. So, if the dollar isn't collapsing tomorrow, but is steadily bleeding purchasing power, how do you position yourself so you aren't left holding paper? Protecting your wealth during a period of structural currency debasement does not require panic, speculation, or reckless risk-taking. It requires adopting the exact same strategic asset preservation frameworks that institutional family offices and central banks have utilized across centuries of monetary history. While passive retail savers leave their hard-earned reserves unhedged in commercial accounts, smart money actively manages counterparty risk by reducing single fiat currency reliance. Here are 4 practical awareness steps that you can take right now to audit your overall financial position today. First, conduct a personal cash drag audit. Take a clear, honest look at your liquid capital sitting in traditional low-yield bank accounts. While keeping a liquid cash emergency fund for immediate short-term living expenses is absolutely necessary, holding excessive paper reserves far beyond your daily operational needs guarantees that compounding real inflation quietly erodes your true purchasing power over time. Second, reframe your understanding of physical gold and silver as allocation insurance rather than speculative trade vehicles. Central banks do not accumulate gold to get rich overnight. They hoard physical metal as an unprintable sovereign capital preservation tool that carries absolute zero counterparty risk when financial markets fluctuate wildly. Third, explore hard asset diversification. Smart capital historically rotates away from paper promises and into tangible productivity assets with structural pricing power. This includes scarce real estate, critical industrial commodities, energy producers, and businesses capable of passing rising input costs directly onto consumers during inflationary cycles. Fourth, study the historical precedent framework used by elite wealth managers. For hundreds of years, sophisticated family offices have spread capital across multi-asset buckets so that no single government decree, central bank policy error, or currency restructuring can wipe out generations of wealth overnight. As always, please remember that this discussion is strictly designed for personal self-education and macroeconomic risk assessment, not personalized investment directives or financial advice. Every individual situation requires thorough personal research and customized risk management before making capital allocation decisions. Now that you have the complete picture, let's tie this together so you can leave this video ahead of 99% of the crowd. Let us summarize what we uncovered today into 3 core takeaways. First of all, skyrocketing national debt forces central banks into relentless currency debasement to service unfunded government obligations. Second, record Global central bank gold purchases represent undeniable proof that sovereign nations are actively de-risking away from paper debt. Third, wealth preservation requires shifting your perspective from paper promises toward real, unprintable hard assets before compounding inflation quietly erodes your purchasing power. If you want to stay ahead of these monumental global shifts, hit that subscribe button right now. We break down complex macroeconomic trends weeks before mainstream media headlines finally catch on, giving you the clarity needed to make intelligent financial moves in an unpredictable world. In our very next video, we are diving deep into the expanding BRICS alliance and revealing exactly how their alternative settlement mechanisms could impact Western banking reserves faster than experts predict. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What percentage of your portfolio do you hold in physical hard assets versus paper dollars? Drop your personal answer in the comments below.